The most recent episodes of The Acolyte have raised some pretty interesting plot points for the show as it moves forward, but the most interesting story element out of all of this has to be the question of who was Qimir's Jedi Master, and I think I have a pretty good idea as to who this might be. And I do really think that Qimir's old Jedi Master has to be Vernestra Rwoh, as all the signs seem to be pointing towards that direction. We learned from Qimir himself that he was once a Jedi a long time ago, something which surprises Osha.
I've never heard of you.
And while just how long ago isn't quite specified, Qimir's long time ago does seem to indicate that it was well before Osha's time as a Jedi, possibly before she was even born. And while there are many Jedi Masters whose species can live for quite some time, the only recurring Jedi that was shown in the show so far who has been around for that amount of time is Vernestra Rwoh. Vernestra Rwoh was born in 248 BBY, and considering that the show is set 100 years before The Phantom Menace, which happens in 32 BBY, it would make Vernestra approximately 116 years old. As the readers of the High Republic will know, Vernestra is somewhat of a Jedi prodigy, having ascended to the rank of Jedi Knight at the age of 16, and so being a Knight and Master for 100 years, she would be old enough to have several padawans across this time. Now, we're not exactly sure how old Qimir is, but he is certainly older than Osha, and considering that Osha doesn't know him, and the fact that Osha is currently 24 and was inducted into the Jedi Order at around 8 years old, this would easily put Qimir in his late 20s or early 30s. So there is definitely more than enough time for Vernestra to have trained him, and for Qimir to leave the Order before Osha has ever heard of him. So clearly the timeline makes this a very good possibility. Another and perhaps best piece of evidence that we have is Qimir's scar. We are told by Qimir that this was given to him by his Jedi Master, much to the horror of Osha, and the unique outline of the scar makes it quite puzzling. Considering that the Jedi lightsabers typically have very clear linear strikes, the almost lightning pattern of Qimir's scar seems to indicate that it was something else that did it. But in that same episode, we are finally shown Vernestra's light whip, and given the fluidity of the whip's movement, it seems highly plausible that this was what created Qimir's scar in the first place. It is also likely not a coincidence that the show decides to introduce a bit of Qimir's backstory and his scar, as well as Vernestra's light whip simultaneously. There does seem to be a lot of heavy foreshadowing and hinting when you consider the timing of these events. Another point to note and consider is that we've seen Qimir as at least a very capable duelist, especially in episode 5, and so it would make sense that whoever Qimir's former Jedi Master is, they too must be at the very least a very good duelist, and one that is capable of almost killing Qimir. And we know from the High Republic stories that Vernestra herself is a very good duelist, in fact arguably one of the best during the time period. Not only does her lightsaber whip give her the advantage, but unlike other Jedi who prefer to fight defensively, Vernestra likes to fight offensively as well. In fact, during her sparring duel between another Jedi named Reath Silas, Vernestra manages to use offensive moves to beat him, a purely defensive fighter. So it would stand to reason that her prowess in her fighting ability will likely translate over to Qimir if she trained him as well. And that unorthodox way of fighting likely benefited Qimir, who probably took it a step further once he embraced the dark side, something which really confused Yord.
He doesn't follow the rules of combat, and there's no method to his movements. It doesn't make sense.
You could almost argue that Vernestra's unorthodox way of fighting closely mirrors that of Mace Windu, who not only had a purple lightsaber, but also fought far more aggressively than other Jedi, which was one of the reasons why he was able to go toe-to-toe with Emperor Palpatine, who managed to slaughter several Jedi Council members in rapid succession. It is also worth noting that Vernestra's character is in general quite unorthodox. In fact, her decision to modify her lightsaber to have a light whip function is illustrative of this, as some Jedi Masters of the time period actually looked down on such combat forms, which used to be more popular during the wars with the Sith, and so many Jedi Masters consider it to be too archaic for modern times. So clearly the signs are all pointing towards Vernestra. Another interesting observation is that Vernestra keeps repeating the phrase,
"Something to tip the scales."
Throughout the entire show, we've heard her say this one phrase over and over again. Now, in the beginning, it seems as though this line was inserted as a way to create some dramatic effect or some foreshadowing for the future events in the prequels, but the subsequent tones she uses after seems to suggest otherwise. Instead, it's very likely that this phrase had a much deeper meaning, potentially a phrase that Qimir used in his last encounter with his former Jedi Master. It just sounds more like reminiscing of something that occurred in the past. Another possibility is that knowing Vernestra's ability to use the Force in hyperspace and their associated visions and voices, it could very well be something that she picked up on at some point in relation to her old Padawan. It's also worth noting that Vernestra's intent on keeping all this under wraps while seemingly appearing to be out of concern for politics may be also related to her wanting to keep her dark past with Qimir a secret as well. Considering that much of the show has been exploring the theme of the master-pupil dynamic, having Vernestra and Qimir be related through the same type of relationship Sol and Osha share is really a perfect way to continue this theme. Much of the show thus far has been about the importance of this master-pupil relationship, both as an emotional need in terms of learning from each other, as well as a cautionary tale of the weight of such a relationship, one that if dealt with properly has the potential to propel the student and master to great heights in terms of a meaningful relationship, and if not, descends into darkness. In many ways, the show is setting up the renewal of the Sith as a direct result in the failure of mentorship. It was Sol's inability to teach Osha on how to let go that ultimately led to her departure from the Order, and now Qimmir's fallout with his own Jedi Master that likely led to this outcome as well. So having Vernestra as the Jedi Master that taught Qimir makes the most sense within this context. Now, if Vernestra was indeed the Jedi Master that taught Qimir, it does raise another interesting question. For one, this wouldn't be the first time Vernestra dealt with another Jedi who flirted with the dark side. In fact, her first Padawan Imri Kantaros also briefly fell to the dark side before being rescued and restored by Vernestra. And so, the question becomes, if she could do it back then as a mere Jedi Knight, why wasn't she able to do it with Qimir? It also raises some interesting questions on Qimir's side as well. Did he have a Sith Master after leaving the Order, or did he restart the Sith all by himself, potentially through self-discovery or research about the Sith? Considering that many of the Jedi at the time were not quite familiar with the Sith, this is probably going to be a very crucial question to answer. So let me know what you think in the comments down below. As always, be sure to like and subscribe, and I will see you in the next one. I'm the Lost Acolyte,
and I have spoken.